to another episode of the Fit Positive podcast, where we talk common sense about health and fitness in midlife, how to look after your body and your mind at this stage of life, being intentional with how we move and how we eat, and focusing only on what's proven by science. Now, today's episode is a little bit different to the usual. I'm sharing a real coaching call I did with my members inside the Fit Positive community back in 2024. So it's completely unedited, unrehearsed, and real conversation, real thinking on the fly tips, and going deep into the struggles around emotional eating. So we talk about each of the reasons for emotional eating and what to do about each one of them. I like sharing these kinds of calls from time to time because I think it's important for you to hear what coaching calls inside the Fit Positive community actually sound like. They're not polished or rehearsed like you'll hear on the podcast. They're more nuanced, thinking on the fly, introspective, and a little bit deeper than what you'll see or hear on the podcast. So if you've ever found yourself thinking, why do I eat when I'm not hungry? Why do I have such cravings? Why can't I stop at one? Why do I keep repeating the same patterns even though I know better? This conversation will resonate. And as you listen, I'd encourage you to approach it with curiosity rather than any form of self-judgment, because awareness is always the first step towards change. All right, let's get into the call.
Emotional eating is really overeating, because if you're overeating, it's not because of hunger. You're ignoring your hunger and satiety cues at this point, and it is always an emotional thing if you're overeating, because if you weren't. So the first thing to understand is, what is emotional eating, and am I doing it? We probably are without even realizing it. I know I certainly do sometimes. But one of the things to ask yourself, if you're eating or if you're craving something, you might even be calling it hunger, but do you really understand what hunger feels like? Because I think a lot of us don't. I had a client here a few months ago who said, I've actually never felt hungry for years because I just keep grazing nonstop all day on rubbish. Never actually felt the rumble in your tummy that you would feel as a kid when you're hungry. You've been out playing all morning and you're coming in for lunch because you're starving. A lot of people don't feel that. They don't feel hunger at all because they're constantly responding to cravings. To understand whether that's hunger or emotional eating or a craving is, if you feel hungry, you're right. You're like, I'm dying for my whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily need to be unhealthy, but you might be dying for your peanut butter on toast, which you crave every morning. But if the way to know if that's hunger is if you are craving anything, you're not craving anything specific. You would eat anything that was given to you because you're so hungry. Like, it could be plain broccoli with no seasoning on it, and you'd still eat it. That means you're hungry. You're actually hungry. Whereas if you're craving a specific thing that you really, really want, that's a craving, and that's usually not driven by hunger. So when you're feeling like you might be suffering from cravings at night, always ask yourself, I'm doing this today just because I'm thinking about it. If I feel like you might automatically be going for the thing that you always go for, a sweet treat or a snack or whatever it is, ask yourself before you eat it, is this hunger now or is this a craving? Just to create the awareness around it. So an example for me is, every afternoon I have something sweet. It might have been my chocolate shake, which I love, or it might have been a small Fulfill bar. Sometimes I have that, but I'm not actually hungry. So that's a craving. And I'm not saying you have to ignore every single craving that exists, but it's just good to know, why am I eating this chocolate bar now? Is it a craving or am I actually hungry? And if it is a craving, and so what if you want to have a small chocolate bar every day, that's fine. But just be aware of whether you're responding to hunger or a craving. That's a good first step. So let's think about then the reasons that we have cravings and the reasons we have emotional eating. What could be causing them? So usually, well, first of all, what we have to remember is that 98% of our behaviors are automated. They're automated behaviors. And so they're being driven by the subconscious mind. So there's the conscious mind, which is determining 2% of our behaviors, and the subconscious mind, which is determining the other 98%. So say, for example, you have a goal. With your conscious mind, you say, I'm joining this program and my goal is to lose weight. And then straight away you find yourself eating stuff that you don't think you should be eating in the evenings or whenever. Your behaviors are not in line with your goals because your behaviors are actually automated. And that's why we focus on automating our habits, our healthy habits on this program, because we want them to be in that 98% that we don't need to think about. And this happens because the brain needs to conserve energy. It can't be making decisions nonstop every day, all day. So it automates a lot of stuff based on, repeated behaviors over time. So for example, if you're sitting on the couch every night and for 3 nights in a row, somebody brings, I don't know, chocolate cake into the sitting room, or it might be, a packet of chocolate biscuits. So every night for 3 nights in a row, there's a cue, like a craving. There's a cue, which is you sit on the couch, right? You're sitting down on the couch. And now the first night somebody brings in the chocolate biscuits and you say, oh, I'll have one of those. And the second night they bring them in and you have them again. Then the third night, just sitting on the couch is going to cause the craving for the chocolate biscuits. So it's all related. And that's really automated. That's already now in the automated habits area. So you would even know, without even realizing it, you could sit on the couch and eat the whole packet of chocolate biscuits without noticing at all, because it was completely automated, and you're like, what the hell have I just done? Then you say to yourself, why did I do that? I'm so bad, and then you're actually causing the whole thing to become personal. Then you're creating negative self-talk around the fact that you've just eaten these things. It's not your fault because the behavior became automated pretty quickly because it was repeated. And this is how we automate behaviors. That's why at the very start of the program, we automate the behavior of showing up for your workouts. We say, you just master the art of showing up. It doesn't matter what you do in the workout. You're showing up at 6:30, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever time you do it. And then after a few weeks, you just automatically show up because you don't have to think about it, because the alarm is the cue, or you leave your clothes out and that's the cue. And all of a sudden you're just working out and you didn't even know how you got there. That's the positive side of it. But the negative side of it is that you're sitting on the couch with a packet of chocolate biscuits every single night now because of the initial pattern that you created. It's a classic cue, craving, response mechanism that just happens in our brains. But as soon as we become aware of these things, like just talking about this now, you'll probably be thinking about it the next time you're sitting on the couch going, here I am, I'm always doing the same thing every time. Here I am having my, whatever the treat is. And I'm not saying that there's anything bad with having treats. I have my chocolate shakes, I have my chocolate bars all the time. The difficulty arises when we can't control how much of the thing that we have. So there are tools around that. I'll get into it in a little bit. But so it's not bad to have things we enjoy. It becomes a little bit troublesome if we can't control. So one person will be able to sit down and have, like my husband, he'll sit down every night and have one square of chocolate. And like, I've never been able to just have one square of chocolate. I'd rather just not have it because I wouldn't have been able to stop at the one square. So I'd either have half of the pack, or I'd go for something else just as sweet to keep satisfying. And the dopamine, it's a dopamine reward. So there's lots of different reasons that cause the cravings and the emotional eating. So I'll just go through some of these. And it's really important to know what the reason is for you. I'm just kind of giving you potential reasons why you could be emotional eating. Maybe you're not at all, but the people who've asked about it. So one of them is, and then we can understand the mechanisms. When you understand the mechanisms behind it, you go, oh, so it's not my fault. It's not me. This is how the body works, So that's great because you take that negative self-talk out of the picture then once you understand why things are happening. And it's always a biology thing, neurochemical thing. It's never a willpower thing or a failure thing on your part. There's always something more scientific at play. And once you understand that, you can then manipulate it in your favor. So one of the reasons is stress, right? Stress eating. We have comfort eating, we have stress eating, we have eating because of boredom, and all of those different things have different solutions. So first of all, we all have stress. Every one of us has stress nowadays. But our biochemical and neurochemical systems don't know the difference between the original stressors that we would have had 100 years ago, where our lives are at risk, and today's stressors, which are smaller but more kind of constant. So we have this low grade anxiety constantly, but the body reacts in the same way. There's a autonomic nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord and all the nerves attached, act automatically based on, we can manipulate it, but a lot of the time it acts automatically. So, for example, we have one side of the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system, and this is fight or flight. This is what happens when we get stressed. And it's a lot to do with fear. We fear that we're in danger of some sort. Like when I used to work in my IT job, I had a constant sense of fear. And I'd often have to say, what am I worrying about? I don't even know what it is. Maybe it was a presentation I had in 3 weeks' time that I was worrying about already. It's stupid stuff, but our body still reacts in the same way with the same tightening, um, tensing of the body and this kind of feeling of insecurity. It could be financial, it could be body insecurity, it could be work insecurity, but it's always to do with some sort of a fear of something bad that's going to happen. And in the past, it would have been fear for our lives. Funnily enough, eating is a mechanism that makes us feel safe in the context of fear. So the motion, the physical, mechanical motion of chewing is one of those things that switches us from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic. So it calms us from that fight or flight state into a rest and digest state. So if we're in the fight or flight state, usually we don't know how our heart rate is increased. We don't know how to switch out of that. We were stressed. Like we just don't know what to do about it. But maybe unconsciously we'll eat. Not everybody does this. Some people can't eat at all when they're stressed, but some people do. And that's because the mechanical thing of the mechanism of chewing actually is a thing that causes us to feel safe. And that's because the original stress, I suppose, the original fight or flight state was because we thought that we were going to starve. We weren't going to survive. And so eating means, okay, we're safe. We're going to live another day. We have food going into the system. So we can relax now and we can rest and digest. And actually chewing can calm that stress. Now, I was never a stress eater and I could never understand it before, but now I do because I understand this mechanism. Even though I'm not a stress eater myself, I can understand how it happens because it's that mechanism of chewing that actually calms the nervous system. So, and you can see it in kids, you can see it in, a lot of people who might be arguing and stressed, they sit down to eat and then they're just calm while they're eating. And it might be temporary, it might come back to the original way, but the actual mechanism does work and there's a neurochemical process that happens behind it. So that's the stress eater. There's another one around self-limiting beliefs or self-sabotage. So people will say, I was doing so well all day and then I ruined it at night by eating those chocolate biscuits. And sometimes that we really need to go very deep into like introspection to figure out why we did that. And sometimes we don't bother. We go, I don't know why I did that. I'm such a loser. And then you start the negative self-talk. And honestly, that negative self-talk, if it's left to continue for a long period, can result in an eating disorder. So it's really important that you're kinder to yourself about this and you understand that there is a different, it's more complex than that. You're not just a loser or somebody with no willpower. Or, and the thing is, like, this can happen repeatedly over time. So then you're reinforcing that self-limiting belief that you're not going to be able to succeed at this. But self-limiting beliefs, we talked about this in the mindset masterclass, they're deep set. They come into our psyche when we're kids. And we really need to go back. And I have actually a blog post on this on the website, which is 6 steps, I think, to uncover and undo those self-limiting beliefs and get rid of them and like turn them around. Because you might have a self-limiting belief like, so you're doing really well, right? You have a goal and you're sticking to the plan and you're doing fine. And then you just sabotage yourself, you self-sabotage, or you get 3 months down the line, you're doing really well and then you self-sabotage, or you're doing really well all week and then you self-sabotage. And multiple reasons for that, but the self-limiting belief one is because you don't feel you deserve it. You, underneath it all, you don't feel worthy of that goal that you've set yourself. So you cause yourself to fail, and sometimes we really need to go back. So there's a lot of steps in that process of undoing those self-limiting beliefs. So I'll share that blog post in a minute. But it comes back to like, why am I saying that? Like, am I saying a statement about myself like, I've always been an emotional eater. That's a self-limiting belief. I've always been like this. I've always been unable to control my eating, or I've always had a weakness for chocolate, or I have a sweet tooth. Like, that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a sweet tooth. But when you think about it, obviously there's no such thing as a sweet tooth. But we might have that belief about ourselves, and that will come through. We'll say, oh yeah, well, that's because you have a sweet tooth. You were always going to succumb to that in the end. And really listen to the thoughts that the things that we're saying to ourselves that are maybe causing us to self-sabotage. There's a lot of work involved in this. So, not everyone is going to need to go down all of these rabbit holes. It's just, you need to go into the one that's relevant to you. So the self-limiting beliefs is a big one. Like, for me, I have loads, like loads, and we all do. I was actually listening to that Gary Lavin podcast that somebody shared recently, the founder of Vitit, and he was talking about, how he's always been very positive about his ability to succeed with Vitit, even though there were lots of things not going his way. And then he was talking to these women in Dubai where he lives, and they were all like teachers and they wanted to leave their jobs. They were on holidays. And he was like, they were trying to think about, what could we do? What business could we start? And he was giving them ideas, and every one of them was coming up with reasons why it wouldn't work for them. Oh, well, I couldn't do that now because I wouldn't get a mortgage, or I couldn't do that now because X, Y, or Z. And he's like, you're putting obstacles in your way at the very start. And why are you doing that? And I have people who do this on my program, or people who are thinking about joining the program, who say, well, I have all these reasons why I won't succeed. And I'm like, well, then you're not going to succeed. If you believe now, before you even start, that you're not going to succeed, you won't. That Henry Ford quote, I said it in the Masterclass, but it's like, whether we believe we can or we believe we can't, we're right. So those self-limiting beliefs are unconscious. They're part of our unconscious mind. And we need to actually really ask ourselves if we have them, number one, and if they're the reason that we're self-sabotaging. Because if we're not hungry, if we're eating and we're self-sabotaging in a situation where we weren't even hungry, it's usually because of an emotional reason, and it could be self-limiting beliefs. So I shared the blog post on that at the end of the call. So yeah, that'll all lead to your confidence in your ability to succeed, which is what he was talking about. He was like, these ladies, they could do anything. Everybody could do what he has done, but they're not doing it because they have these self-limiting beliefs. They're holding themselves back from the person they could be and the things they could achieve, because they're at the very start saying, no, I wouldn't be able to I couldn't do that now because of this, or what about this, or what about that, looking for obstacles instead of looking for a path. And those self-limiting beliefs usually come from kids we spoke to when we were young, our parents, our teachers, people, authority figures who said stuff to us that we believed when we were as gospel when we were kids. Like, my mother would have said, I wasn't the sporty one. My two brothers were the sporty ones. But I was sporty. I just didn't realize it until I was much older. I mean, I played sport, but didn't identify as a sporty person because she told me that I wasn't. She said I was the academic one. So I went to university, did the whole thing, got a big career in IT. And it was only much later on that I realized I actually prefer the sport. I prefer healthy stuff and health and fitness. But, I believed that that wasn't me because somebody told me when I was a kid. So we really need to understand if the reasons we're overeating, and it is overeating, if you're just craving, you have really bad sugar cravings and you're succumbing to those, but it's overeating because you're not hungry. Ask yourself, is that to do with some sort of self-sabotage? Why am I doing this to myself? Like, this happens a lot. So why does this keep happening to me? It's not that it keeps happening to you. You're not the victim of it, but it's also really not your fault. It's something that you need to just delve into and uncover and pick apart until you get to the bottom of it. Because you can't keep repeating the same cycles. It's actually soul destroying. So this is like deep already. Somebody was saying, can we just get solutions for sugar cravings? So actually, yeah, there's a good few others here that are quite deep, but I'm going to quickly talk about the body imbalances. So imbalances, which is what we talk about mostly. So often I'll say it's not to do with your willpower, it's to do with biology. And you know that the nutrition plan is all about rebalancing our nutrition, rebalancing our macros, rebalancing and that actually rebalances our whole system. Because you know that so first of all, if we are not balanced in our macros and we're eating all carbs and sugars and fats and no protein, you're a blood sugar roller coaster for the whole day, and you will not be able to resist the cravings that go along with that. So this is where like a physical imbalance is causing you to behave like this. It's nothing to do with your mindset. It's to do with the fact that you've given yourself the wrong food to start the day. You've had porridge with no protein, which is healthy food, but it needs to be balanced. So my mom, I was just in France with her there, and I can't criticize my mom. I just can't. And there's no point. She's 74. So I had to keep my mouth shut. But she would eat like fruit, just fruit on its own for breakfast, which is healthy, but it needs protein and fat to go with it. You know, you do need to have balance, and then you'll stop the cravings that come along later in the day. That's a physiological short circuiting a process that if you don't short circuit it will send you off on a blood sugar roller coaster that's 100% not your own fault because you don't understand what's going on. And you think in the evening, I can't stop eating these treats. It's because you've probably just not had enough protein throughout the day. That's one potential reason, right? This is the physical imbalances. Another physical imbalance is that you may actually, but this is different because you may actually be under eating calories. If your calories are too low, then, and you're craving food in the evening, that might be because your calories are too low, but that's usually hunger. It's hunger that you're feeling there. So it's really important to differentiate between hunger and cravings. So if you're feeling hungry in the evening and so you eat whatever is handy, that's different. If you just eat the biscuits because they're there and they're the first thing that kind of appeared when you open the cupboard, that's not emotional eating. That's just you haven't eaten enough. So you need to eat more and your calories are too low. Another related reason for craving in the evening is that we're overly restricting ourselves physiologically or, from a nutrition perspective throughout the week or throughout the day. So maybe you're saying at the end of the night, you go, oh my God, I was so good all day and now I've been so bad. See this good, bad thing? We can't talk about either ourselves or food as being good or bad. It's just food and we're just humans. We're probably responding to some sort of a neurochemical or hormonal trigger in our biology that's causing us to go for this thing. It's not really us that's good. We're not good or bad. But if you're finding that you're trying to be really good all the time, that's usually overly restricting. It usually means you're overly restricting during the day or during the week. So you're saying, I'm giving up all the bad stuff and I'm just going to be so good from Monday to Friday. The inevitable result of that over restriction is that you will binge on whatever the thing is that you consider to be bad at night or at the weekends. So what we're trying to do there is moderate our behavior so that we're not being too good during the day so what I like to do is I'll have treats every day. If I want, I'll have a glass of wine. And whenever I want a glass of wine, I'll have a glass of wine. But I won't have much because it's about moderating. So instead of somebody else I was talking to the other day went on a night out on Friday and she was saying that, well, I don't know the background actually, but just use her as an example. She planned only to have one or two drinks and she ended up having at least double the amount that she planned to have, plus a dessert and plus snacks when she came home. And that's possibly, I don't know the background to that situation, but the possibility is that she was overly restricting during the week and being too good during the week. When I was in France, it was crazy. They were having wine with every meal. At 11 in the morning, I went to this marketplace and they were all having wine with their like lunch or brunch or whatever it was. Wine at 11 in the morning. I was like, God, that's crazy. But they had one tiny little glass with their food and off they went. They don't do this thing that we seem to do in Ireland where we don't drink it all and then we go on a mad night out and it goes on all night and it's a binge restrict cycle. So we really want to get out of that. So don't overly restrict. Don't try to be too good. That's not going to lead to success in the long term because what we're trying to do here is have habits that we can keep going forever. It's not like I'm going to lose 20 pounds and then call it a day kind of a program. I'm going to build healthy habits that I can sustain forever. And in order for them to be sustainable, they can't be restrictive. So if you do restrict, then you could end up binging in the evening. So that's another physical imbalance, right? Other physical imbalances relate to hormones. So we might find we have cravings that are determined or triggered by certain times of the month, or if we're perimenopausal, or, that's a hormonal imbalance. And sometimes HRT is the answer for that one. Or in the menopause masterclass, we talked about all the other things we can do to balance our hormones, one of which is balancing our macros so that we're avoiding the things that we struggle with, like blood sugar balance. We struggle with that. We struggle with stress management, things like this in perimenopause. If we look at those things that we're struggling with and deal with those, then we could end up getting rid of the cravings, you know. So it's about kind of going back and trying to find the root cause of the feeling that's causing you to overeat or crave or whatever it is. What am I feeling that's causing me? So usually cravings come from some sense of discomfort. And it's a case of, before you respond to the craving, asking yourself, like, why am I craving this now? Is it hormones? If it's hormones, there are things we can do from a diet and lifestyle perspective to balance our hormones. And there are things we can do from a pharmacological perspective. All of that is covered in the program. That's what we're doing already, you know, except for the HRT piece, which is obviously your medical practitioner. But when you're asking yourself, what is it that I'm doing? Another thing might be like boredom. Sometimes we just eat because we're bored. And this is definitely, I've definitely done this. So sometimes we're eating because we're physically, literally filling a void, because we just feel so bored and empty at the end of our day that we need something to make us feel better, you know. And sometimes that's because, you know, maybe we have a job that we hate. Maybe we have a job where we really find it like arduous and like we don't like it. So we keep taking breaks. If you're working from home, this is common, very common amongst people who are working from home, that they'll crave food throughout the day because they'll keep snacking. That's a craving. It's just a snacking thing. It's not actually hunger. They don't even wait to the point that they feel hungry. They just constantly snack. And that's because you're bored with your work and you need something to distract you or to make you feel better. And sometimes it's a case of questioning your job and wondering, well, maybe I could change that up a bit. Maybe I could try and do something that gives me a bigger sense of purpose in my job. So usually boredom triggered emotional eating comes from a lack of a sense of purpose, lack of passion in your day. You know, maybe you're just bored of the project you're on or the job you have or the task you're working on at the moment. So in every one of these situations, it's about questioning yourself about the feeling that's causing you to crave food and sugar and wondering what else you could do to deal with that emotion. So what we're doing if we're just eating the food is we're using the food as a coping mechanism for the feeling, that discomfort. But what we could do is look at that feeling in a bit more detail and wonder, what could we do about that? So in the Mindset Masterclass and the Mindset Guide, we have tools for dealing with stress. We have tools. So stress, I talked about earlier, stress and the chewing response, right? Stress eating. The chewing response calms us from feeling stressed. Workout does the same thing. What else? Exercise, going for a walk does the same thing. Going for a sea swim, or, you know, if you're into that. There are lots of other things. So depending on what it is, whether you're bored, if you're bored, you need to find a sense of purpose in your day and get stuck into that, you know, so that you don't feel so bored. It's not as easy. I know it's easy for me to list these things out. It's not as easily done as it is said, but these are just the starting points, really. And then you can kind of delve into this. And if one of these things resonates with you, we can do a little bit more research on that particular thing. And then, you know, introspection in that area. So I talked about overly restricting already. Another one that's definitely not within my remit is repression. Sometimes, you know, if we have had childhood trauma, something very traumatic that happened to us in childhood, or something that caused us to feel emotional trauma, even if it wasn't a huge thing, like maybe somebody didn't die, maybe it was just that our mothers were unavailable to us and we felt a little sense of abandonment, and we used food as a coping mechanism for that as a child, then that continues into adulthood. And what we really need to do in that situation is get some therapy to deal with the thing that we're repressing. So we're repressing that horrible time that we had, or the, you know, if somebody did die, or if, you know, we really had bullying, something like that. You know, all of these horrible traumatic experiences that we can have earlier in life can lead us to eat as a coping mechanism. And, you know, using my program is great, but it's not going to deal with that underlying trauma. You definitely need a professional who is like qualified to deal with that to help. And it's worth doing it, because once you do, then you can really find a sense of freedom in terms of eating and food. So another thing that comes up in my head a lot, because I do feel I haven't been diagnosed, but I do feel I definitely have it. I've done all the online tests and everything, is ADHD. So if you have ADHD, people with ADHD generally, I'm making a big generalization, our dopamine levels are quite low. Therefore, what we do, so dopamine is the motivation hormone. You just want more and more of it. Usually that means it has sugar and fat in it. They generate dopamine. So you get a dopamine hit from eating those lovely foods, a feeling of pleasure. If you have a high level of dopamine and you're doing running, the dopamine will be the motivation to keep running. So, or to keep going on a program like this. I often say on a Friday, we need to celebrate our Friday wins, because celebrating our Friday wins generates dopamine in the brain, and dopamine is the motivation to get more of that. So if in the context of food, if you're having foods that are really, really tasty and more it, usually they generate dopamine in the brain, and the dopamine immediately signals you to have more of that food. So you cannot stop eating it. And that's the Moorish thing. Like but that, when it relates to someone with ADHD, is much more difficult to control than a neurotypical person, because it could be like ADHD people have a much higher tendency to become addicted to substances or alcohol or food because of this low level of dopamine. So we're constantly craving dopamine hits to just keep us going, otherwise you can really sink into a low place of no motivation to do anything. So a lot of ADHD people crave like extreme sports and, triathlon, things that are really hard. So your motivation levels go up when you get these dopamine hits. And that's what keeps people going if they have ADHD and they have low motivation levels. So it's a case of trying to figure out with that situation, what's the root cause? If it's ADHD and you are not yet on medication for that, it's worth talking to your, or maybe you haven't even been diagnosed yet. Maybe it's a very big journey that you need to go down to discover the fact that you've got ADHD. And that's the whole reason that you have these uncontrollable sugar cravings. So but that is a common thing. Like ADHD people do tend to have more difficulty controlling things like sugar cravings because they crave that dopamine much more than the average person does. So exercise is really good for anyone with ADHD. Exercise is brilliant for calming the overactive brain. So even walking is brilliant for that. But also things like sea swimming, like cold plunges, that gives you a huge dopamine hit, and that will replace the dopamine hit that you get from the food. So it's kind of a case of figuring out what is the cause, what's the feeling that I have, and what's the cause of my particular sugar craving, and then delving into that in more detail, whether it's ADHD, whether it's hormonal imbalance, whether it's just boredom, whether it is self-limiting beliefs, self-sabotage caused by self-limiting beliefs, or whether or not you might be repressing something very traumatic that happened in the past and your coping mechanism is food. And that's something that really does require investigation. Because once we get into a negative cycle about this craving, sugar cravings, overeating, emotional eating, if we're blaming ourselves for it, that's the wrong thing to do because it's not our fault. These things are happening for a reason. There are lots of reasons here, and that's not even the full list. Why we could be a slave to our hormones, because what happens is there's neurochemical reactions that are happening in our brain that cause us to behave in certain ways, right? So neurochemicals and hormones are actually determining what we do all the time without us realizing. So, I mean, I know this from perimenopause, and I behave in certain ways at certain times of the month that I don't behave in other times of the month. And it's purely down to hormones. And I think it's the other person's fault when it's not. It's not their fault. They're not doing anything differently. It's my hormones that are causing me to react differently. So yeah, like there are just so many reasons that we could be doing this, but it's not our fault. It's usually never our fault. And it's something that we just need to investigate. All of that said, what are the tools then? So yes, we need to investigate each of those things. And the tool that we use will be different depending on the cause of the emotional eating to begin with. So definitely go back to the mindset masterclass. And if self-limiting beliefs is a thing for you, or the blog post, I'll share that in a minute. And yeah, really look into, so these are the actionable things you can take away from this call. Look into whether you know what hunger truly feels like, and so every time you are thinking about eating, is that hunger or is it a craving? If it's a craving, then we need to just separate ourselves from the craving and the response for a second. Ask ourselves, why are we craving that now? Is this just an association thing, like where we always sit on the couch and we always have Netflix on and a box of Cadbury's roses in front of us and we just autopilot, throw them into our mouth constantly until they're gone. That's just a cycle that needs to be broken. So what the way to break that is to distinguish between hunger and cravings. Firstly, if it's a craving, it's really difficult to do this. I know this, but we should try to get to the point where we're eating only when we're hungry and not when we're craving something. So wait until you're hungry, then yeah, eat something that you like the taste of, but don't be a slave to a craving. So it's very difficult to do, but what we have to actually try and do is just put a bit of distance between the craving and the response. So you could say to yourself, I'm just going to write this email and then I'm going to go. Or I'm just going to go for a 10-minute walk and then I'll have that thing that I'm craving. Just put a bit of distance between you and the response, between the craving and the response, because there's a whole thing. It's a classic craving response mechanism that we all have, where you crave something and you respond to it, you get a response. So, like, say, for example, you don't even have the craving. As soon as there's a trigger, right? So the trigger is you sit on the couch and you're about to watch Netflix and you don't even feel anything. But all of a sudden you're putting Cadbury's roses into your mouth because you've automated the whole mechanism of craving and response. So you just need to put a separation between the craving and the response so that the brain doesn't then know that every time I sit on the couch, I get Cadbury's roses. All of a sudden, you sit on the couch and there are no Cadbury's roses and you're actually breaking that cycle. And it's hard at the start. So you might want to substitute it with something else, like, or just not sit on the couch and go for a walk, then for a little while. And then you sit on the couch later on and it's different. You just feel different and you don't go for or you resist the cravings. Like it will get easier if you keep ignoring the craving, because the craving response mechanism will just break. It won't get the response, so it will go away. So the flip side of that is then really reinforce the hunger um, response mechanism, right? So we want to reduce the craving response mechanism and increase the hunger response mechanism. So we do want to eat when we're hungry. We don't want to be starving ourselves, because what's happened here is we have become resistant to the actual hormones, leptin and ghrelin, that cause hunger and satiety. So leptin is the hormone that causes you to feel hungry, and ghrelin is the hormone that causes you to feel full. But we ignore those and become resistant to those if we keep feeding ourselves when we're not hungry, or we continue to eat when we're full. And we do that because of the craving. It's not hunger. If we're full and we keep eating, which we've all done, I do it all the time. I mean, I did it in France at the weekend because the food was so amazing. But if we're doing that on a daily basis, that becomes a problem. But if we are eating after we're full, we're numbing ourselves to the cue that comes from our satiety hormone ghrelin. And if you don't respond to that satiety hormone by stopping eating, the hormone stops being generated. And what's actually happened, and this is why Ozempic is even needed and these weight loss drugs, it's one of the reasons, is that those two hormones, we've become resistant to them because of constantly ignoring them. So if you constantly ignore things over years and years, your body will adapt so that it doesn't even send you the signal anymore. So you can keep eating and you'll never be full. And this is why we have the whole obesity epidemic in the first place. So you can see how it all ties back in to really tuning into your own hunger cues and respecting them. Don't ignore them. If you're hungry, you need to eat. If you're full, you need to stop eating. And even while you're eating, ask yourself, am I full? Am I full? Am I full? And try to really come back to those hunger cues and satiety cues. And we want to increase those and decrease the cravings. And there are mechanisms there that we can interrupt or respect, and we can train ourselves away from the cravings. One other thing is the moderation training. So like for me, when I was young, the boredom of doing my homework triggered me to go and eat these chocolate biscuits, McVitie's chocolate biscuits, chocolate digestives. I used to have a whole packet. I could have a whole packet every day, and it didn't make a difference when I was that young, but I couldn't do it now. And nor should you, because I had no control over that. It was a craving caused by boredom, which caused me to never be able to have those chocolate digestives in the house, because if as soon as they came into the house, I would eat the whole packet. And so for years, I didn't have them in this house now, because if I did, I would get my cup of tea just as if I was doing my homework again, grab the biscuits and eat the whole packet. That's fine. You can take the approach of never having the biscuits in the house again, and that's fine. But a better thing to do would be say to yourself, I have an issue with those chocolate biscuits. What am I doing? Why do I have that issue? It's boredom. It came from that time when I was a teenager and I had that boredom with my homework. So what I need to do now is I have purpose in my life now. I don't feel bored. I love my job. So I should be able to reintroduce those chocolate biscuits in a moderate way. And you can practice this. So you can say, I'm going to bring the biscuits back into the house and I'm going to train myself to have one biscuit every day. And I'm going to see if I can do it. And you won't do it all perfectly. You might end up having the whole packet the first day, but bring the biscuits back in the next day and have one biscuit and see, you can train yourself to be moderate with these things that you think you have no control over. So my message here is like, we do have control over our bodies. We have control over everything once we know how our bodies work. This is the whole point of my program. When I always say, like, when we start working with our midlife bodies, weight loss becomes effortless because you're understanding all of the mechanisms and you're able to manipulate them in your favor. And you shouldn't be controlled by your food. That's just stupid. We cannot let that continue if we're being controlled by our food. We need to deal with that. Don't shy away from it. So for me, it's a case of having one of those chocolate biscuits every day in the context of my calories and macros and seeing if I can train myself to just have one. So that's another option for anyone who is trying to overcome a particular food that they just feel that they are, or, have a weakness around. So what you're doing is with all of these tools is you're rewiring the subconscious behaviors, those automated behaviors. You're short circuiting them and creating a different path. And then you need to reinforce that path. That's why I'm saying you need to do that every day. So you need to practice it. So practice having the sugar craving thing, whatever it is for you, practice having it every day, but once a day, one thing, and in a small controlled amount. And eventually you will rewire that path in your brain and you'll be able to control those cravings. And that's what we want. That's the holy grail, because then you do have food freedom. You can have whatever you want whenever you want because you're not going to overeat it. Same with wine. Like I was really shocked first when I saw those French people drinking the wine at 11 a.m. But then I was quite impressed because they don't overdrink. They don't drink all day. They don't go to the pub and sit there for the rest of the day drinking, watching football. They have their one plate of oysters, their one tiny glass of wine, and they go off about their day. And that's called moderation. They're able to do it. And we should all be able to do it. We can, if it just requires a bit of training. And we leave it there, guys. Bye, guys.